Hi. For those of you that don't know me, what have you already decided about me? Pause for just a moment. You can even stop the video if you want and ask yourself, what decisions have I made about this guy that's talking in this video? For those of you that know me, well, you've made decisions too. I'd ask you to pause and ask the question, what is it that makes me feel the way I do? What is it that makes me think about him the way I do? My name is Jeff Bobbin. Some of you may think, whoa, wait a minute, I know that guy. I've heard him on the radio, or I've seen him on Facebook, or I've heard him speak somewhere. We crossed paths somewhere along the way. But today I wanted to talk to you about what I think is a very important topic. I describe it as default judgments. We all do it. I do it, you do it. For those of you that don't know me, you did it when you started watching this video. As soon as I appeared on the screen, you made certain assumptions about me. You made certain judgments. Maybe it was based on the clothes I'm wearing, or the amount of hair I have, or the fact that what I do have is gray and right now long, that I wear a goatee. We all make decisions based on our first impression of people. I used to tell people when I was teaching sales years ago that you often decide you're not going to buy from somebody in the first 30 seconds that you meet them, because something doesn't click, and so that is really important. But I wanted us today to think about how it is that we decide how we're going to react to somebody. In the world we live in today, people are struggling with reactions. And so there's a couple of terms that I use to describe that. The first one is default judgment. What are those things that we fall back on when we first meet a person based on some characteristics? Maybe it's their voice. It can be any number of things. But I think it's really important that we learn to look at what those are and why we react the way we do. The other thing is what I call default assumptions. What do we assume when we do learn something? If you had heard my name before, you may have had a positive or negative reaction to the name. As you learn more about me, you'll make assumptions. You'll decide certain things. I wanted us to be thinking about that in this world we live in today. What are our default assumptions? What do we default to when we don't have anything else to go on? We do it in many, many different ways. I learned that, and I wanted to share a couple stories with you about why I think those are important things. Let me share two brief stories with you. I lived in the Pittsburgh area for many years, and so I knew my way around the city, and one day I was driving across town and I came up on some traffic, and I thought, you know what, if I make a right turn here, I can just slip up a few blocks, make a left, and I'll be back on the street I want, and then I can get on the road to get out of town. So I made that right turn. I went what I thought was far enough to get where I wanted to go, and I made a left, and pretty soon I found myself on a dead-end street. I began to look around the street and realized there wasn't a whole lot of traffic on the street, and I had to turn around. So I turned around, and there was some people sitting on their porch. They were all black, and they looked at me kind of funny. Well, I didn't give it much thought, and as I turned and went to go back out the street, here comes a police car the other way. And as I pulled up to him, he reached his hand out for me to stop, and I stopped, and he looked at me and he laughed and he said, "Are you lost?" And I said, well, yeah, I was trying to get down to such and such a road and I thought I was taking a shortcut. How did you know? And he said, well, we don't see too many white folk in this part. He was a black policeman. And we laughed, and I said, well, I assumed that's how it, and he said, well, let me turn around and I'll help you get back out of town. Now, my reaction to him, because I've had friends that were police officers and even worked for a police department as a dispatcher for a while, was by no means negative. He led me down a few blocks and put me back on the right path, and away I went. And I've thought oftentimes that isn't always the reaction that others would have. That if I had been black and driving in a white neighborhood, I would have reacted differently. People would have reacted differently. Maybe the police would have reacted differently. But the question is, why? Why does that happen? The truth is, we were both making default assumptions about one another. See, earlier in that day, I had been in another African American community where I was supposed to be to meet somebody. And I thought about that as I drove home. But let me share one more story with you about assumptions and how people decide what they're going to think about you or where you're from. I was on an airplane. I got on an airplane to come home from a trip to Israel, and I was flying out of Amman, Jordan. And I got on the plane, and there was a young mother sitting there. I would learn that she was a young Palestinian mother, and she was in my seat. And she looked at me and she pointed, was this my seat? And I said, yeah. And I said, pointed inside, I said, is that yours? And yeah, I said, that's okay. I'll sit inside, because I figured she'd be up and down with the little one. But so we sat down and we struck up a conversation. We were flying from Amman, Jordan to JFK in New York, so we spent a number of hours together. But one of the things that she asked me, I'll never forget, because it has changed the way I look at life. She looked at me and she said, are you an American? And I said, yes. And she said, aren't you afraid? And I was a little taken back. Afraid? Why would I be afraid? And I said, well, no. Why would I be afraid? And she said, America is such a violent place. I'm moving there to be with my husband, and I'm really nervous about living in the United States. Now, I really had to think about that, and I spent a lot of that trip, and many times in the years after that, I've thought about why she reacted that way. And as we were coming home, and I was continue my conversation with her, and then thought about the news that I had watched while I was in Israel, and what I read in the newspapers and so on, saw on TV. It was all violent news. But something else left me think and understand her. Shortly before I left, I went to get my hair cut. The girl that cuts my hair had been cutting it for many years. And I said, well, I'm leaving for Israel in a few days. I wanted to get my hair cut before I left. And, you're going to Israel? Oh, aren't you afraid? No, I'm not afraid. Oh, and I'll never forget, before I walked out the door, she hugged me like she might never see me again and said, I sure hope you're safe. You see, what was on the news was often about violence in the Middle East, and I realized that many people see that part of the world as a violent place. Like most of our communities, there's violent places, there's things that make the news. But you know what I've learned? Every community has people in it that care about others. There are good people in every one of our communities. And I've decided to make a conscious decision to be careful about what my default assumptions are when I meet somebody. I still have them, but I try to pause and ask, what don't I know? What am I assuming is true? And the more I get to know a person, the more I learn about them. I continue to make assumptions and have to check myself and say, is what I believe about this person true? I hope that I've given you some food for thought. Those that know me know that's one of my favorite phrases. I just want you to have some food for thought today about the default judgments you make and the default assumptions you make about others.